When she came back from her vacation, everything fell off. I know it sounds cliche, but it was like the woman I kissed goodbye at the airport was not the same woman who walked back through her front door. And, to be honest, I didn't want to see it at first. I convinced myself it was jet lag, or maybe just that post-vacation blues everyone talks about. You know, that letdown of coming back to regular life after a week in paradise. But her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore, and her laughter, the thing I fell in love with first, felt forced, like it was coming from some hollow part of her. I still remember the morning she left. She was excited, giddy even like a kid going on their first school trip. It was a girls' vacation, just her and two of her best friends from college, and I was happy for her. Honestly, I encouraged her to go. I knew she worked hard, and I figured a week of sipping cocktails on the beach and lying in the sun would be good for her. At the time, I had no hesitation about it. I trusted her completely. I mean, why wouldn't I? We'd been married for 8 years, together for 11, and as far as I knew, we had a strong marriage. Sure, we had our ups and downs, who doesn't? But we always came out the other side together. I spent that week missing her. It sounds pathetic, but I really did. I'd catch myself checking my phone, waiting for her texts, which were sparse but sweet. She'd send me pictures of the ocean, of her holding a drink with a tiny umbrella in it, and I'd imagine her smiling on the other side of the screen. She'd tell me how relaxing it was, how much fun she was having, and I was genuinely happy for her. She deserved it. But when she got home, something was different. I noticed it right away. She hugged me when she walked in the door, but it was quick, like she couldn't wait to let go. Her suitcase stayed by the door for days, which wasn't like her. She's normally a neat freak, the kind of person who unpacks the second they get home, but this time she seemed indifferent, detached even. The first night, she didn't even really talk to me. She said she was tired and went to bed early, leaving me sitting alone on the couch, staring at the TV, but not really watching it. I tried to brush it off, but I could feel this knot forming in my stomach, this sense that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I kept catching her zoning out, like she was somewhere else entirely. She was still doing all the things she normally did, making coffee in the morning, working out in the evenings, but it was like she was on autopilot. When I tried to ask her about the trip, she'd give me these vague answers like, "Oh, it was fun," or "the weather was perfect," and then quickly change the subject. And then there was her phone. She was always glued to it, even more than usual. I'd walk into the room, and she'd quickly lock the screen or flip it face down. I know how this sounds, but at the time, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining things because of how distant she seemed. One night, about a week after she came back, we were sitting at the dinner table, and I asked her point blank if something was wrong. She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, and for a split second, I saw something flash across her face, guilt, maybe, or panic. But then she smiled, this fake practice smile that I'd never seen before, and said, "No, of course not." Why would you think that? It was such a simple question, but the way she asked it made my stomach churn. Why would I think that? Because she wasn't acting like herself. Because she couldn't even look me in the eye. Because I could feel her pulling away from me, inch by inch, and I didn't know how to stop it. I told myself to let it go. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the woman I'd built a life with, the woman I loved, wouldn't lie to me. But the seed was already planted. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it grew. I started noticing little things. She started working late more often, even though her workload hadn't changed. She stopped initiating any kind of affection, and when I tried to hold her or kiss her, she'd stiffen, like my touch made her uncomfortable. And then there were the nightmares. She started waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, her face pale and sweaty. When I'd ask her what was wrong, she'd just shake her head and say nothing. Go back to sleep. I didn't know it then, but those nights were the beginning of the end. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the cracks in our marriage were growing wider by the day, and I was starting to see things I couldn't unsee. I just didn't know how deep those cracks went. Not yet. The first real blow came about 2 weeks after she returned. By then, the distance between us was impossible to ignore. We'd gone from talking about everything to hardly saying more than a few words to each other each day. She was always busy with something. Her phone, her laptop, a random work call that sounded way too casual for something professional. I couldn't take it anymore, So I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. It was late at night, and she was in the shower. I don't know what came over me, but I felt like I was losing my mind. The way she'd been acting, the secrecy, the defensiveness, it was all eating me alive. I grabbed her phone off the nightstand, and my hands were literally shaking as I unlocked it. I hated myself in that moment. I felt like I was crossing a line, violating her privacy, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut anymore. At first, I didn't find anything. Her text seemed normal. Her social media looked the same as always, but then I opened her photos. That's where I found it. There was a folder buried in her gallery that was password protected, and I swear my blood ran cold when I saw it. She'd never been the kind of person to keep private folders like that, at least not that I knew of. My heart was pounding as I tried a few obvious passwords: her birthday, our anniversary, and, to my surprise, one of them worked. The photos hit me like a punch to the gut. There were pictures of her at the resort, but not the ones she'd shown me before. These were different. In one, she was sitting at the edge of a pool, smiling at someone behind the camera. The look on her face, it wasn't the kind of smile you give to just anyone. It was intimate, soft, like she was letting someone see a side of her she'd kept locked away. And then there were the other photos, ones that made me sick to my stomach. There she was, lying on a beach towel, her head resting on some guy's chest. Another one of them at a bar, his arm around her waist, his hand way too low for comfort. And the worst one, a selfie of them in what I could only assume was her hotel room. She was wearing a robe, her hair wet like she'd just gotten out of the shower, and he was behind her, shirtless, grinning like he'd won some kind of prize. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but instead, I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been with another man. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the water in the shower turned off, and I panicked. I quickly locked her phone and put it back on a nightstand, then crawled into bed like nothing had happened. My heart was racing as she came into the room, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping wet. She didn't even look at me as she got dressed and climbed into bed, her back turned to me like always. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but another part of me didn't want to hear them. I wasn't ready. Over the next few days, I started to piece things together. I'd already seen the photos, but I needed more. I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. I started checking her phone whenever I got the chance, looking for anything that could confirm what I already knew deep down. That's when I found the messages. They were buried in a hidden app, one of those vault apps disguised as something else. I'd never seen it before, but it didn't take me long to figure out how to open it. The messages were there, a string of texts between her and some guy named Liam. The texts were explicit. They talked about how much they missed each other, how amazing that week had been, how they couldn't wait to do it again. My stomach churned as I read them, each word cutting deeper than the last. There was no doubt anymore. She hadn't just cheated on me. She'd carried on an entire fling with this guy, right under my nose. I confronted her that night. I couldn't keep it in any longer. I waited until we were both sitting in the living room, the TV on in the background, and I just blurted it out. I know about Liam. She froze, her eyes wide, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. That's when my world shattered. She admitted everything. How they'd met at the resort, how one thing had led to another, how she hadn't planned for it to happen, but didn't stop it when it did. She said all the things I expected her to say, that it didn't mean anything, that it was a mistake, that she loved me and didn't want to lose me, but none of it mattered. All I could think about were the pictures, the messages, the lies. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, numb, as she begged me to forgive her. But in that moment, I knew things would never be the same. Something had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could ever be fixed. I don't know how I made it through that night. After her confession, I couldn't bring myself to look at her, let alone say anything. I just got up, grabbed my keys, and left the house. I drove around aimlessly for hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, replaying her words over and over again. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? How could it not mean anything? She had shared pieces of herself with another man. Her smile, her laughter, her body. She let someone else hold her, touch her, kiss her. How could any of that not mean something? I ended up at a parking lot overlooking the city, staring out at the blinking lights below. I felt empty, hollow, like someone had carved me out from the inside. I wanted to cry, to scream, to do something, but I just sat there, motionless. My entire life felt like a lie. When I finally went back home, it was nearly dawn. She was sitting on a couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red and puffy from crying. For a split second, I felt something pity, maybe, or a shadow of the love I used to feel for her, but it was gone just as quickly as it came. She looked up at me, her face full of hope, but I couldn't give her that. Not anymore. I can't do this, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face crumpled, and she started crying again, sobbing into her hands like a child. Please don't say that, she begged. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything. Please just give me a chance. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that the life we'd built together wasn't completely destroyed. But the trust was gone, and without that, what did we really have? For the next few weeks, we existed in this strange limbo. I couldn't bring myself to leave, not yet, so I stayed in the guest bedroom while we tried to figure out what to do. She kept apologizing over and over again, but her words started to lose their meaning. She said all the right things, did everything she was supposed to do. She deleted the guy's number, blocked him on everything, and even let me go through her phone whenever I wanted, but none of it mattered. I couldn't look at her without seeing him. Every time she reached out to touch me, I'd flinch. Every time she said she loved me, all I could think about was the way she'd smiled at him in those pictures. I started questioning everything. Had there been other times? Other men? Was this just the first time she got caught? She swore up and down that it wasn't, that this was the only time, but how could I believe her? How could I believe anything she said? One night, we tried to talk about it, really talk about it, but it didn't go the way either of us hoped. I asked her why she did it. I wanted to understand, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. She hesitated at first, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for the right answer, but then she finally said it. I don't know. She whispered, I guess I felt like I wasn't enough for you. Like I was just this boring, predictable version of myself, and I wanted to feel alive again. He made me feel wanted. I stared at her, stunned. Not enough for me? I had given her everything, my time, my energy, my love. I had built my entire life around her, and she thought she wasn't enough. The irony of it all was like a slap in the face. I've never once made you feel unwanted, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Not once. If you felt that way, why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you tell me instead of doing this? She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, and I realized something in that moment. She wasn't the only one who had changed. I had changed too. The man I was before her vacation, optimistic, trusting, maybe even a little naive, was gone. In the days that followed, I started confiding in a couple of close friends. I needed an outlet, someone to help me make sense of the chaos in my head. Their reactions were all the same: anger, shock, and above all, disbelief. You're really going to stay with her after this? One of them asked. How are you ever going to trust her again? The truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to try to fight for our marriage, but another part of me knew I was only prolonging the inevitable. The damage was done. One evening, I caught myself scrolling through photos on my phone, old pictures of us from before the betrayal. In every single one, we looked so happy, so in love, but now all I could see were cracks I hadn't noticed before. Was this always going to happen? Was I just too blind to see it? She kept saying she loved me, but love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. Eventually, I realized that no matter how much I wanted to fix things, I couldn't do it alone. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I even wanted it anymore. Her betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice that had shattered everything we'd built together. That's when I started thinking seriously about divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but at some point, I had to ask myself, what's the point of holding on to something that's already broken beyond repair? Making the decision to file for divorce felt like ripping my own heart out. But in the end, it came down to one undeniable truth. I didn't trust her anymore, and I didn't think I ever could. Trust is the foundation of everything, and hers wasn't just cracked. It had been obliterated. I couldn't live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if she'd betray me again, or worse, if she already had and I just never found out. The night I told her, I expected it to feel cathartic, like finally releasing a weight I'd been carrying. But it didn't. It felt like dying. I sat her down in the living room, the same place where she'd confessed to everything, and I told her as calmly as I could that I was done. "I've thought about this a lot," I said. "I can't keep pretending that things are okay, and I can't stay in this marriage knowing what happened. I think we need to separate permanently." The look on her face was one I'll never forget. It was like all the air had been sucked out of her lungs, like she hadn't seen this coming even though it had been written all over my face for weeks. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as tears welled up in her eyes. "No, please don't do this. Please. We can work through this. I know we can. I'll do anything. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. Just don't leave me." Her desperation was heartbreaking, but I couldn't let myself be swayed. "Not this time. It's not about what you can do," I said quietly. "It's about what I can't do. I can't move past this. I can't look at you without seeing him. I can't live my life wondering if you'll do it again. It's not fair to me, and honestly, it's not fair to you either. You deserve someone who can forgive you. I'm not that person." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands, and for a brief moment, I hated myself. I hated that I was the one hurting her now, even though she'd hurt me first. That's the thing about love. It doesn't just turn off, no matter how badly you want it to. Even after everything she'd done, I still loved her in some twisted, painful way. But love wasn't enough anymore. The next few days were a blur. I stayed with a friend while she packed up her things and moved out of the house. We'd agreed that I would keep it, at least for now, since she didn't want to stay somewhere with so many memories of us. I think part of her hoped that leaving would make me miss her, that the emptiness of the house would make me realize I couldn't live without her. And you know what? It did feel empty. The silence was deafening, and every corner of the house seemed to remind me of her. The couch where we used to cuddle and binge-watch shows. The kitchen where she used to dance while making breakfast. Even the damn scent of her shampoo lingering in the bathroom. It was suffocating, but at the same time, it was liberating. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't have to force myself to smile when I didn't feel like it. I didn't have to pretend everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. I could just exist. The divorce process itself was straightforward, but emotionally, it was anything but. We didn't have kids, thank God, but dividing up our lives, our finances, our possessions, our memories, was like carving up a part of my soul. Every time I had to sign a document or sit across from her in the lawyer's office, I felt a fresh wave of grief. She tried to fight for us, even during the divorce. She'd send me long emails telling me how much she regretted what she'd done, how she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me if I just give her the chance. Part of me wanted to believe her, to run back to her and pretend none of this had ever happened. But I knew better. Trust isn't something you can just glue back together. Once it's broken, the cracks are always there. The finality of it all didn't hit me until the day the divorce was finalized. I was sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot, staring at the papers in my hands, and it just crushed me. This wasn't how things were supposed to end. We were supposed to grow old together, to build a family, to laugh about stupid inside jokes until we couldn't anymore. But now all of that was gone. In the weeks that followed, I started trying to rebuild my life. I threw myself into work, joined a gym, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. They tried to cheer me up, taking me out to bars and introducing me to new people, but I wasn't ready for any of that. How could I even think about moving on when I was still carrying so much hurt? I kept thinking about the man she cheated with, Liam. I wanted to hate him, to blame him for what happened, but the truth is, he wasn't the one who destroyed my marriage. She was. She was the one who made the choice to betray me, to lie to me, to break the vows we made to each other. He was just a symptom of something deeper, something broken inside of her that I couldn't fix. There are days when I feel like I'm finally moving forward, when the pain feels like a dull ache instead of an open wound. But then there are days when it all comes rushing back: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss of the future I thought I'd have. On those days, it's hard not to spiral, to wonder if there was something I could have done differently, if there was some way I could have saved us. But deep down, I know the truth. This wasn't my fault. She made her choice, and I made mine. And as much as it hurts, I know I did the right thing by walking away. I've learned a lot about myself through this process, about my strength, my worth, and my capacity to heal. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. And maybe, just maybe, there's a version of me out there somewhere in the future who can look back on all of this and feel grateful. Grateful that I had the courage to leave. Grateful that I chose myself even when it felt impossible. For now, though, I'm just trying to take it one day at a time. That's all I can do.